Did it cross the line? Did it not cross the line? One of the best football games I have ever seen. It was a very, very unpleasant experience. So I'm afraid there and then I decided that was not an environment for me, and we have never been back. England versus Germany. It is one of the most important rivalries in international football, if not the most important. From a purely sporting point of view, it has brought us some of the best spectacles at both the World Cup finals and the European Championship finals. Whenever it comes around, the fixture is always really important to both sets of fans, and I'll be looking back over the history of the fixture as a purely sporting event, looking at why it makes for such a great rivalry, but I will also be asking the question whether it maybe brings out the ugly side in the English fans. Maybe they take it a bit too far and it brings out the nationalist, jingoist side in them, and asking the question, do we English fans have a problem with xenophobia? Hello there, my name is Richie. Welcome to the channel. If you like what you see, like and subscribe, and feel free to comment down below if there's anything I missed or you want to add your opinion to any of this. With meetings between the two teams in important international competitions like the World Cup and the European Championships in 1966, 1970, 1990, 1996, and again in 2001 and 2004, the list is endless, and there's enough material there to just make this one great sporting rivalry. But we've all seen the videos here on YouTube of England fans travelling around Germany in 2006 singing songs about German bombers in the air getting shot down by the RAF. It seems there's a willingness amongst England fans to link this, what is a purely sporting event normally, and a great rivalry in itself, there's a willingness to link that to historical events, link it back to the war and a time more than 70 years ago. I'll be asking what it is about the psyche of the English fan, maybe looking from a cultural point of view, what it is that drives the England fan to exaggerate so much and make this fixture much more than just a game and turn it into almost World War III. So let's look back at some of the important fixtures over the years then, and what better place to start than 1966. The Germans had long since established themselves back on the international scene, winning the World Cup in 1954, and in England they stormed into the final where they met the hosts England. The final itself is a scene of what the Germans refer to as das Wembley-Tor, or literally the Wembley goal. I mean, on the day there were actually 5 other goals scored, so it's a little bit of a strange reference for us English, but they do of course mean the hotly disputed goal. Did it cross the line? Did it not cross the line? Did Geoff Hurst really score a hat-trick? Well, the linesman from Azerbaijan said yes, so I have to say it's a fair goal. England ultimately then of course turned out the victors, winning 4-2, the only World Cup in England's history, and still to this day a date that the English like to look back on fondly. The teams met again only 4 years later, this time in Mexico in the finals in 1970. In the quarter-final, England storming into a 2-0 lead only to lose 3-2 in the end, the Germans turning the fixture all round with a brilliant comeback and getting revenge for the final in Wembley. The next fixture of any real note came in 1990 at the World Cup finals in Italy, the semi-final in Turin, and this is, as a football fan, probably trying to see it from a neutral point of view, one of the best football games I have ever seen. Albeit I only saw it on TV, it really was football at the highest level. For me it was the best, probably the best England side I've ever seen. That and the England side of 1996 at the European Championships in England 6 years later. But this really was a fantastic game. The Germans went ahead with a little bit of luck, the ball looping over Peter Shilton's head after a deflection from Paul Parker's heel, who was standing in the wall defending a free kick, only for Gary Lineker to equalise sometime in the second half. This was of course also the scene of Gazza's famous second yellow card, which would have eventually ruled him out from playing in the final, and Gazza's tears. It was a very poignant moment for all English football fans, one that we all still identify with to this day. It was really football at its highest level, maybe England shading it overall on play, and just for the way that the attitude, the more attacking, free-flowing football that they wanted to play. In the end though, it was a classic case of German Siegeswillen, the will to win, digging deep when the going gets tough, and just keeping the cool head and putting away those penalties where Stuart Pearce and one of my favourite players of all time, Chris Waddle, failed. For me, the German side, the less attractive, the less adventurous on the night, but just with that extra bit of will to win, a little bit of luck along the way, and a cool professional head. We fast forward then to 1996, and again this is one of the best games of football I've ever witnessed. This for me is really the pinnacle of football. I'm biased because of course I am a fan of both English and German football, but the semi-final between Germany and England was up there with the greatest matches. Again, this is a game from a time where the German teams were a lot more cautious than they are today. They never used to play that free-flowing football, the kind of football that they've played ever since the Klinsmann revolution, and the tradition that Jogi Löw has carried on with now, where they play a high pressing game and really exciting fast passing game. Back then it was all a little bit more cautious and a little bit more a little less entertaining, to be honest, but very effective. And of course it ended with another trophy for the German team and another win in the semi-finals on penalties against England. Again, there was no shame in that for the English side. It was a great side, and many people forget that in that tournament England did actually win a penalty shootout. They had won a penalty shootout. They had a lot of fortune against a good Spanish side, eventually winning on penalties against the Spanish. But it was not to be, and the more typical story of England losing on penalties continued, and Germany won out. England having some clear-cut chances, Gaza nearly reaching across in extra time, nearly wrapping it up with a golden goal, but alas, the Germans triumphed again. Now by this stage we can appreciate that why this is so important as just a football rivalry. We've had some really great games on the biggest stage. The World Cup finals in 1966, the actual final itself, the quarterfinals in Mexico, a total of 11 goals in those two fixtures on the biggest world stage. Even Stevens on games, one win each at the World Cup finals, and also one World Cup win for both the Germans in 1954 and the English in 1966. So going into the 90s, it was a real clash of what were considered the big names on the world stage. But then of course, as an Englishman, I had to sit and watch and see how two of the best English teams I've ever seen were cruelly beaten by the narrowest of margins, twice on penalties, by a team now that had probably established itself more as part of the elite than the English could ever hope to have been. So it was very cruel, and from that point of view alone, it's understandable why that means so much to the English. After the golden era of the 90s for this fixture, then began a stranger period. The two sides met in the Portugal European Championships in the year 2000, neither of the teams progressing from the group, England winning a very, very dull affair, 1-0, a goal from Alan Shearer in the group stages. As I say, neither of the teams progressing through the group stage, and it was probably, in my opinion, the worst ever German side I've ever seen under Erich Ribbeck. And the England team wasn't up to much tactically either under Kevin Keegan, I'm afraid. And then of course the game that no England fan and no German fan will ever forget. England and Germany had been drawn in the same World Cup qualifying group. Germany had won the first fixture, the last ever game to be played in the old Wembley Stadium, but then it was the turn of the Germans to host the English in the Munich Olympic Stadium. On paper at least, this generation of English players was all set up to be England's golden era. You had players like Steve Gerrard, Michael Owen and David Beckham all in the same team, and this was probably the evening that they did get close to fulfilling their potential, but just only for 90 minutes, where they absolutely blew away a very ordinary German side, it has to be said, 5-1. Michael Owen scoring an absolutely immaculate hat-trick. As fate would have it, the English met the Germans again in the World Cup finals in 2010 in South Africa. The Germans getting revenge, erasing the bad memories of the 5-1 in Munich completely with a very convincing 4-1 win against a tactically naive English side, very inept English side, deserved winners, despite the strange decision about the goal that really should have counted from Frank Lampard just before half-time, which would have made it 2-2, but it was really against the run of play, and there were no other signs that the English were going to get back into that game, and the Germans won thoroughly deservedly. They dominated from start to finish, and it was, of course, they were planting the seeds of what would become the World Cup winning side in 2014. So purely from a sporting point of view then, there is plenty of reason why this is one of the great rivalries. Some really great games over the years at the very pinnacle of the sport, at the World Cup finals, in the final itself, semi-finals, some really great battles. Germany over the years emerging as the more dominant force consistently in international football, but even so being run very close and even soundly beaten sometimes by the English. But why is it then that the English fans have to make so much more of it? Why do they have to go that step further? And why do they think it's okay to sing songs like 10 German bombers in the air being shot down by the RAF and 2 World Wars and 1 World Cup when they're playing against the Germans? Now, we all know that sometimes football fans like to push the boundaries of taste, and when there are strong rivalries, you can quite often hear in all countries, certainly in Germany and in England, when it comes to local rivalries in national football, some of this singing, some of the chants get pretty near to the bone, and there are some really strong insults. However, I don't think anybody would really argue that it's appropriate behaviour to come over as a guest in somebody's country, like 2006 in the World Cup, for instance, when the English fans came over here and were constantly singing wherever they travelled about shooting down German bombers from the sky and 2 World Wars and 1 World Cup. For me, this clearly crosses a line, and it's moving into nationalist territory that really has nothing more to do with sporting rivalries. I will talk to you later about some of my experiences with the English fans abroad, but I also want to look at what it is that makes it, what is it about the English psyche, the English culture that makes it seem okay? Why do English fans travel in big numbers and constantly harp on, constantly refer back to World War II and killing Germans? And although it may seem like a silly question, why don't the Germans do it? Because they don't go around travelling to England and singing about how they bombed Coventry to the ground. And we do, of course, have to look at the history of both countries since the Second World War. For the British, all the British, but in particular the English, looking back to 1945, the end of the war, it's a source of pride for the nation. It was a victory, and a very important victory against fascism in Europe. Together with the Allies, the British and therefore the English played a very important role in shaping a better future for the world and, of course, Europe. For the Germans, of course, the end of the war is also grounds for celebration, finally being liberated from fascism and given the chance to start again and form part of a modern Europe. For the Germans, it's all about the future. Of course, looking back over the war, it's a great source of shame for the nation. For one nation, it's grounds for pride, and for another nation, it's grounds for real shame. Now, I also studied German literature at university, and when you get to the post-war period, you quickly come to realise there is one predominant theme, and that is what the Germans refer to as Vergangenheitsbewältigung, or literally coming to terms with the past. The early post-war period in Germany is, of course, all about coming to terms with this shameful past. So whilst it's also really important for Germans to remember the war and remember the Nazi period, it's much more important for them to want to move on and to progress and to look into the future. And that's exactly what the Germans did. They looked to the future. They went through the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. Germany was rebuilt into the technological leader and economic powerhouse that it is today, also at the same time forging new democratic bonds, being at the very heart, the very start of what is the European Union today, directly seeking an alliance with the French, and then one by one all its European neighbours. For the British, 1945 marks the pinnacle of the state's power. It was a Britain that still held a lot of influences in the colonies. It still had colonies. The old saying, the sun never goes down on the British Empire. It had territories all over the world, and even though there were independence movements and independent states being founded in the Commonwealth, it still had a lot of influence. As one of the victorious allies in World War II, the British were of course an occupying force in Germany, shaping the future of Europe and the future of Germany, and not the other way around. Now, as time goes by, it seems that the roles have been reversed on the world stage. Germany has grown as an economic force, looking forward, embracing a unified Europe, where there's still been a lot of skepticism in Britain about a unified Europe. The economic importance of Great Britain, the United Kingdom, has become proportionately less and less over the years, and it's been very difficult for the British to accept that they are not a world power anymore. The United Kingdom, of course, still today has structural power, what is referred to as structural power, which goes beyond its actual weight, economic weight and size as a nation. It punches way above its weight, so to speak, in that it is a member of NATO, is a permanent seat on this Security Council of the UN. This structural and essentially political power that give the United Kingdom a slightly disproportionate influence on world politics are very real, very practical, but they originate from a time from the end of the war. These are all structural powers granted by their position after the war as an absolute world power. Those days are gone, but the British have had a difficult time accepting that. As Brexit has shown, the result in the Brexit referendum has shown, the imminent exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union, the British have always had a little bit of problem coming to terms with the idea of being one nation state within a united Europe, which is probably more in line with the role that a nation of Britain's size should actually play. There's always been a kind of romanticized, nostalgic will to return to the past, a past that's not really realistically going to come back. And to be honest, it is also a past that in part at least has been built on imperialism, military might, slavery, lots of really unsavoury things. So this psyche does exist within the British, within the English nation, this longing for a perceived romanticised, more golden past where Britain was great, we ruled the world, we told the Germans what to do, and in 1966 we showed the Germans how to play football, and since then the Germans have overtaken us. It's been a parallel development as Germany has developed and its influence on the world stage has grown as being at the heart of the European Union, and simply as an economic power our influence has dwindled. And since 1966 we've hardly even beaten the German football team on the world stage either. Nationalism, racism, xenophobia, ignorance, obviously these are not exclusively English or British problems. I mean, Germany has its problems with the odd nationalist idiot, right-wing idiot, of course, everywhere does. But there is one factor I think that helps stir the pot even more and makes England a whole different atmosphere to Germany. For the Germans watching, you have to bear in mind you have got one Bild-Zeitung, you have got one tabloid newspaper, as you refer to it. You call it the gelbe Presse, the yellow press literally. We call those tabloid newspapers, and really in Germany there is only the Bild-Zeitung. The rest of the press they may be more right-wing, more economically liberal, they may be more to the left, they may be more in favour of the Green Party or whatever, but it's all serious journalism. It's to be taken seriously and it can be relied upon. The situation in the UK is completely different. For every serious paper, for every newspaper that is to be taken seriously, you have one tabloid, one equivalent of the Bild-Zeitung. You have got the Sun, you've got the Daily Mail, you've got the Daily Mirror, you've got the Daily Star. The list goes on, and maybe with the exception of the Daily Mirror, which tends to support the Labour Party and lean towards the left of politics, more social politics, all of these are very conservative, very right-wing and extremely nationalistic. They really appeal to a lowest common denominator and really do cross a line into xenophobia a lot of the time. And if you want to understand just how influential and important these tabloid newspapers are in the UK, you only have to look back to the 1997 general election result in which Tony Blair's Labour won. It is the only time I can remember in my lifetime. The first general election I remember in the UK is in 1979. I was 6 years old, and it was the election that the Conservative government won. Since then we have only had one exception, and that was the government of Tony Blair from 1997. They did, to be fair, win 2 terms, 2 general elections in a row. But why? Why did that happen? Well, it was the only time in history that the Sun newspaper, officially switched sides. They supported Tony Blair's election campaign in 1997 and continued to support him throughout his term as the Prime Minister. This influence is of course something which the owners of said newspapers are well aware. Look at the headline in the Sun newspaper after that historic win by Tony Blair in the 1997 election. It was the Sun what won it. There's really no arguing with that. They really do shape society. Look at the Brexit result. Nobody thought it was possible. Nobody really believed that the British were going to vote to leave the European Union, but some relentless campaigning, largely by the tabloid newspapers, the Daily Mail most notably. These newspapers have a really great influence over British politics. To bring this back then to the subject of football, the subject of the video, which is actually about a football rivalry, we only have to have a look at some of the headlines, some of the back pages. The back page, of course, on a UK newspaper is always where the sport starts, but the sport, when it's when there's a big game between England and Germany, it's big news, so it often makes the front pages or a middle page spread. Let's have a look then at some of the quite shocking images and the shocking allusions to war that appear in those tabloid newspapers. And I think we can go a long way to explaining why that some English fans do take it too far and are all too ready to get nationalistic and relate what is a joyous sporting event to war and a victory in a really horrific, bloody war that is glorified and really shouldn't be glorified. Yes, it was important to history. Yes, it was important for the future of Europe and the world. Yes, it should be a source of pride for the Allies, but it's not to be glorified, and it is not sport. So I say we can go a long way to explaining why it happens, some of the circumstances why it happens, this perceived idea of England as part of a golden era where we ruled the world just after the war, and wanting to get back to that age where we had so much more influence, seeing the English football team go downhill as the German football team improved and looked to the future. In parallel, the German state growing in strength, growing in influence, and all the time we've got the tabloid newspapers tapping into that psyche, whipping up English football fans into a frenzy. And I have to conclude, I asked the question earlier on at the beginning of the video, do the English football fans have a problem with xenophobia? And in my experience, limited as it may be, I have to say a problem with xenophobia. I have to say, in 2006, of course, I was already living in Germany and the World Cup was here. We were hosting the World Cup. It was a really great experience, especially living here in a host city in Dortmund and having another host city just down the road, Gelsenkirchen. I really enjoyed the experience. It wasn't a great tournament for England. I did have the fortune of seeing England play against, or the misfortune, depending on how you see it, playing and losing against Portugal in Gelsenkirchen. At the time I was in quite a neutral part of the ground, so I wasn't in the thick of it with all the English fans. I got a ticket late off eBay. I hadn't got tickets beforehand, but the experience, the great experience with international football, that encouraged me to sign myself and my wife up as members of the English FA, the English fans, or whatever you call it. Sign up as English fans, the membership you need to be able to follow England home and abroad. And we decided we were going to watch a few international games. England were playing Andorra, and it was due to be hosted in Barcelona because the infrastructures in Andorra were deemed not good enough, so we decided to go and watch this game. And I have to say it was a very, very unpleasant experience. For me, there was an unpleasant atmosphere. Now I know the majority of fans travelling and watching England are perfectly normal, decent human beings. They behave well. They are not racist, overtly racist. They are not... they know how to behave. But there was something very different about the overall atmosphere. It was an atmosphere in which certain racist elements felt comfortable. There were racist fans, something I've never witnessed at a normal game. Yes, sporadically, the odd bit of racism, sexism, homophobia, but isolated cases at club games I'm talking about. But in this case, they weren't isolated cases anymore. There were people that seemed to feel emboldened by a kind of different atmosphere, and I witnessed in Barcelona local residents of Arabic descent being referred to as Paki out loud, being shouted at as Paki out loud, something that I really thought I'd never experienced. And then when we were finally at the game in the ground, I was just dismayed by the content of the chants. It was as if we'd forgotten why we were actually there. I was there to watch England and hopefully cheer England on to win a game, but I swear something like 60%, it felt to me at least, of the chants were to do with war, imperialism, fighting old battles. One of the most common ones at the time was attack, 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 attack Iraq, in reference to the Iraq War. There was no end of chanting about Germany and the Second World War again. And of course another old favourite, singing about no surrender to the IRA, presumably in a time post Good Friday Agreement, a time of peace where we'd found a solution for lasting peace in Northern Ireland, where British and Irish, people who perceive themselves as British and Irish, live and were cohabiting peacefully, maybe for the first time in decades. So I'm afraid there and then I decided that although I love supporting England, I love my football team, that was not an environment for me, and we have never been back to another England game. And I have to conclude, sadly, that the English national team does have a problem with nationalism and xenophobia amongst its fans. I'm sorry, it's not the environment that I want to watch football in. Feel free to disagree with me if you have had more positive experiences with the national team, or chime in if you're a German fan or a fan of any other nation. Love to hear of your experiences of international football. I will continue to look forward to this fixture. The England-Germany game will always be, certainly for me anyway, living in Germany as an Englishman with German citizenship, it is the most important fixture. Nowadays I can even be happy for the Germans when they have a bit of success. I cheer them on, honest. I really do get really happy when the Germans win. Maybe just to end on a positive note then, or at least to try and put a positive spin on this video, when it comes to all this perceived hatred and all this harping back to the war and a time when the English beat the Germans and why it's so important to beat the Germans, underlying all of this is a sense of respect. Certainly, at least when it comes to football, it's jealousy, it's respect. Look at what Germany has achieved since 1966. It's much more than the English team has achieved. If you look deeper, it really is a sense of pride. Certainly for me, those two games that we played, 1990 and 1996, by then Germany was established as a world power, even more now on the football stage. I'm talking, not talking politics now, just on the football stage, and going toe to toe, and maybe even looking more likely winner out of those two games, those two semi-finals, 1990 and 1996, and just losing out on penalties. That's a source of pride, because there is no doubt about it. If you get behind the bravado and ask an English football fan what he really thinks of the Germans, it's built on respect. It is all built on respect, and I think there were no doubt a lot of really positive stories about German and English fans mixing, normal, well-behaved fans mixing in 2006 and getting on like a house on fire with mutual respect. I hope one day that the travelling English fans will get a grip on their xenophobia and their jingoist nationalism And I also hope that someday that the United Kingdom will stop reading terrible newspapers like The Sun. And in any case, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you some food for thought. Love to hear your comments. If you enjoyed what you saw, please do like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Take care.